Welcome the anointed ones. Every villain was once a hero in someone else's life. That's not just poetic, that's psychological warfare in real time. Because here's the twisted truth, they hope you never realize. Sometimes the people who buried your story the deepest were the ones who smiled the widest. Let that sit. According to behavioral psychology, guilt isn't just an emotion. It's a delayed consequence. People don't always feel bad for what they did. They feel bad when their carefully edited version of the truth starts glitching in the eyes of others. Now imagine this. You were the deleted scene. Not because you didn't matter, but because your truth did. The moment your name comes up in their conversations, their throats tighten just a little. Their words stutter, their eyes flicker, and they recall, but not in a lovely, nostalgic manner. What if someone eventually asks what happened? What kind of way? And the greatest part? You didn't have to say a thing, but let's be honest. You have a lot to say, and it won't be cute. So strap up. We're not here to play victim. We're here to flip the spotlight, rip the mic from the liars, and finally tell the side of the story they tried to erase. And just a heads up, this won't be the kind of truth you sip tea to. They silenced you to preserve the illusion. They didn't silence you to protect themselves. They silenced you to protect the illusion. That's the part they'll never admit. It was never about keeping peace or avoiding drama. It was about maintaining appearances. The fragile little house of cards they built with their version of the story neatly stacked on top. You were the one card that could blow it all over. And they knew it. See, the truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous to them. Not because it would harm anyone physically, but because it would force everyone around them to see the cracks in their carefully curated mask. And once people see those cracks, it's over. Sympathy dries up, credibility drops. So instead of facing that, they buried your truth like a body in the backyard and hoped no one would ask questions. You weren't silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because you knew the weight of what you had to say. But they flipped it, making your silence look like guilt, as if you had something to hide. Meanwhile, they were handing out their version of events like flyers on a street corner, making themselves the narrator and writing you out of the plot completely. What stings the most is that people bought it. Maybe it was easier. Maybe they were too lazy to look deeper. But now that illusion is cracking on its own. The guilt they carry isn't noble. It's selfish. They're not sorry. They hurt you. They're sorry. They can't keep hiding it for much longer because guilt has a funny way of leaking through even the most polished faces. And now the story they told is starting to sound a little too rehearsed. They didn't erase you because you were irrelevant. They erased you because you were the proof that none of it was real. And they knew the second your side came out, the illusion they protected so desperately would collapse in front of everyone. Number 2, you were the villain in a story they wrote for convenience. You were never the villain, but they made you one because it was easier than facing what really happened. They didn't want to sit with the discomfort of their own actions, so they twisted the story, rewrote the rules, and handed you the blame like it was yours to carry. It didn't make sense, but it made them feel better. It wasn't justice, it was convenience. The truth is, people will turn on the person who makes them feel the most, even if that feeling is honesty, discomfort, or raw truth. And you didn't sugarcoat things, you didn't play along. You stood there with the unfiltered version of what happened, and that made you dangerous. Not loud, not aggressive, just real. And nothing threatened to lie more than someone who wouldn't agree to it. So they rewrote the script. You became the problem, the one who couldn't let it go. Suddenly you were the dramatic one, the bitter one, the one who just couldn't move on. But deep down, they knew exactly what they did, which is why they had to turn the spotlight on you to keep it off themselves. Because once people start asking questions, the whole facade starts falling apart. And let's be honest, they didn't just villainize you in private. They did it publicly, quietly enough to appear innocent, but loud enough to ensure it stuck. Whispered comments, twisted facts, subtle shade, and the worst part, people believed it not because it was true, but because it was easier than facing the fact that someone they liked or admired had done something ugly. They painted you as the villain not because you were wrong, but because your truth made them uncomfortable. Instead of owning their mess, they made you wear it, not because you deserved it, but because they couldn't face the reality of what they did without the mask you let them keep. Number 3, Their guilt isn't about you. It's about getting caught in their own reflection. Their guilt has nothing to do with you. That's the part that people miss. They're not staying up at night, crushed by the weight of how they hurt you. They're not reliving the damage or wishing they could take it back. What really haunts them is what it says about them, not what it did to you. Their guilt is self-centered and not rooted in empathy. It's rooted in image. What eats them alive isn't the pain they caused. It's the thought that someone might see them differently if the truth ever comes out. They built their identity on being the good one, the misunderstood one, the victim, even, and your side of the story threatens to completely ruin that. That's why they avoid it, not because it's painful, but because it exposes them. Your truth holds a mirror up, and they can't handle their own reflection. This guilt they carry isn't pure or noble, and it's not the kind that leads to growth. It's the kind that festers inside, forcing people to overcompensate by acting overly kind, overly healed, and overly unconcerned. They try to convince themselves and everyone around them that they've moved on. But the guilt leaks out in defensiveness, over-explaining, and weird little digs they make when your name comes up. You become the quiet itch in the back of their mind. They can't scratch because deep down they know, but they won't reach out. They won't own it because that would mean putting their pride on the line, admitting they got it wrong. So instead they suffer in silence, not for you, but for themselves. Their guilt is a punishment of their own making, not a redemption arc. You're not the focus of it. You're just the reason it exists. That's the sick truth. Their guilt isn't about healing what they broke. It's about avoiding the proof that they're not who they pretend. Number 4, they love the idea of you broken. It made them look like the saviors. They didn't love you. They loved saving you. Or at least the version of you that looked like a project they could fix. Broken, quiet, and dependent, that version made them feel important, needed, and righteous. It gave them a role to play. The healer, the helper, the selfless one. But the truth is, they weren't lifting you up out of compassion. They were using your struggle to boost their own ego. As long as you stayed quiet and hurt, they got to wear the good person badge. They got credit for being there, for putting up with you, for sticking around. They'd tell others how much they did for you, how hard it was, and how much you were going through. And everyone applauded them, not you, because to them you weren't a full person. You were a backdrop to their performance. They didn't actually want you healed. They wanted you grateful. They wanted you to stay beneath them so they could feel above you. The moment you started reclaiming your voice, strength, and clarity, the dynamic stopped working for them. Because then the narrative shifted. You didn't need saving, you needed honesty. Honesty would have forced them to answer for the very things they were hiding behind their good intentions. If you had spoken up back then, really spoken, they wouldn't have looked like heroes anymore. They would have looked like what they were. People who fed off your vulnerability and called it kindness. People who took power in being the rescuer but panicked the second you rescued yourself. That's why your silence worked so well for them. It kept the spotlight on their performance. But now that you're no longer playing that role, they're scrambling because the truth is, they were never saviors, just well-dressed cowards, hiding behind your pain, hoping no one ever notices who really needed saving. Number 5, they weaponized your absence. They turned your silence into a weapon and aimed it right back at you. You stepped back to protect your peace, to process, to breathe, and they made it look like abandonment, like you didn't care, like you gave up. They took your absence and spun it into a story in which they were the ones left behind. When the truth is, they were the ones who pushed you out. You didn't go quiet because you stopped caring. You went quiet because there was nothing left to say that would have been heard. Every time you tried to explain, you were twisted. Every time you opened up, they used your words against you. So eventually you stopped, not because you were cold or cruel, but because talking to people who only listen to react, defend, or manipulate is a dead-end conversation. But they knew that, and they used your silence to paint a version of you that fit their needs. They told others you disappeared, you cut them off, and you changed, but they never admitted to what caused you to withdraw. Dismissiveness, betrayal, gaslighting, and constant pushing until you had no choice but to protect yourself. The truth is, they never earned your presence in the first place. They mistook access for entitlement. They thought they were owed explanations, forgiveness, and the best parts of you, even after proving they couldn't handle them. And when they didn't get it, they played the victim. Your absence wasn't cruelty. It was a boundary. It was survival. And instead of owning their role and why you stepped back, they rewrote the whole thing to look like they were the ones abandoned. Because playing the victim is easier than facing the truth, they were never shut out, they just weren't worth letting back in number 6. They weren't ready for you. So they destroyed you first. They weren't overwhelmed by you, they were exposed by you. Your depth made them uncomfortable, not because you did anything wrong, but because it forced them to confront how surface level they really were. You showed up with truth, emotion, and layers, and they couldn't match it. They couldn't even sit with it. So instead of admitting they couldn't handle you, they tried to break you down into something smaller, something quieter, something easier to ignore. You were never too intense, too sensitive, or too much. You brought honesty into rooms where denial was comfortable. You posed questions to which they had no answers because you spotted the things they attempted to conceal. That type of presence is scary to individuals who value performance above authenticity. So what did they do? They attacked first before anybody could see your light. Clearly, they cast dirt on your name. Not because you were dangerous, but because you were undeniable, and they couldn't risk being the ones who fell short in comparison. The truth is, some people will destroy what they don't understand. It's easier for them to label you dramatic, unstable, or difficult than to admit they weren't equipped to meet. And rather than say, "I'm not ready for this," they chose to tear it down because if they break you, they don't have to face their own lack of depth. You weren't the problem. You were the mirror, and what they saw in it scared them. Not because of what it revealed about you, but because of what it reflected about them. They couldn't hold space for anything real, so they tried to convince the world you were fake. But the truth always survives, and so did you. Number 7, you were the test. They failed spectacularly. You weren't a random moment in their life. You were the test. Not the kind with clear instructions and neat answers, but the one that reveals character in the rawest, ugliest ways. Life dropped you into their world not to tear them down, but to see what they do when faced with something real, something that couldn't be manipulated or faked, and they failed spectacularly. You didn't demand too much, just honesty, consistency, presence, and the bare minimum of emotional integrity, but even that was too much for them. Instead of rising to meet you, they panicked. They lied, ghosted, twisted, and blamed. They fled when things got real because real was never what they were built for. They thrived in shallow waters, and you showed up with oceans. They didn't drown because you were deep. They drowned because they never learned how to swim. In reality, you were never a punishment. You were a mirror, a measuring stick, a moment of choice. They could have evolved, but they chose comfort. They could have listened, but they chose control. And now, with the story played back, in hindsight, their choices speak louder than anything they ever said. Because when it mattered, when it really mattered, they folded. And not quietly either. They didn't just fail the test. They tried to flip the exam table, blame the questions, and rewrite the grading system. They spun narratives, made themselves the victims, and pretended none of it was their fault. But truth has receipts, and time keeps the score. What they don't understand is that the test wasn't about perfection. It was about being real when things got messy, about showing up, even when it was uncomfortable. They didn't have to be flawless. They just had to be genuine. But they chose fake smiles, weak excuses, and exits disguised as boundaries. So, no, you weren't the one who failed. You were the test, and you did exactly what you were supposed to do. Reveal what couldn't be faked, and now they live with the result. Number 8, your story didn't die. It just got buried alive. They thought burying your story would be the end of it. That if they denied it long enough, rewrote it convincingly enough, and said it with just the right tone, it would disappear. But truth doesn't die like that. It doesn't fade because someone is uncomfortable. It doesn't vanish because it's inconvenient. All they did was bury it alive. Your story didn't stop existing. It was just forced underground into the corners of their mind. They try not to visit, but it's still there, breathing beneath the surface. It shows up in the tension they can't quite explain. The way they hesitate when your name is mentioned, the way their voice tightens when someone asks about the past. It's in the details they constantly have to remember to lie about. Because that's what happens when you try to bury something alive. It moves. They didn't erase you. They just pressed mute and hoped no one would notice. But now, every smile they force, every posturing moment of peace carries cracks, and your truth is seeping back in. Not with a bang, not with revenge, but with a quiet, steady weight. The kind that lives in the back of their mind and makes them flinch when no one's looking. You never needed to shout. You just needed time. And time, ironically, is working for you because truth doesn't stay buried forever. It grows stronger in the dark, roots itself in reality, and eventually breaks through in conversations they can't control. In people starting to connect dots in memories they can't rewrite. So, no, your story isn't gone. It's alive and louder than ever in the silence they desperately try to keep, and that's what will undo them. Not drama, not confrontation, but the slow, unrelenting return of the truth they swore would never surface. They didn't just walk away. They built a legacy on the ashes they left behind. They crafted a version of events where they came out looking wiser, kinder, and more healed. They took your collapse and used it as proof of their strength. They told the story in a way that made you the storm and them the survivor. People believed it because it was cleaner, simpler, and easier to swallow than the messy truth. They built an entire reputation on selective storytelling, leaving out the part where they caused the damage, where they lied, manipulated, or fled when things got tough. They edited the truth like a highlight reel, trimmed out the guilt, and hit play in every room that would listen. Meanwhile, you were left trying to make sense of the wreckage while they were already polishing their new image. But here's the thing about lies, they're never solid. They might hold up for a while, but they're hollow underneath, and hollow things crack when pressure builds. All it takes is one person asking the right question, one person who knew the real version, one moment when they slip and contradict their own narrative, and the mask begins to slip. They're not afraid of you coming back with vengeance. They're afraid of someone connecting the dots of the image they worked so hard to create, falling apart because someone dares to ask, wait, what really happened? Every kingdom founded on lies has an expiry date. It might take time, and it might even appear stable from the outside, but the truth has a funny way of surviving. It waits, it watches, and it resurfaces slowly, steadily, and with receipts. They know what they built and what they buried to build it, which is why they're constantly on edge, constantly performing, and constantly hoping no one digs deep enough to find the bones. But bones don't stay buried forever, and when they resurface, so does the truth. They tried to silence number 10. They fear your voice not because it's loud, but because it's true. They're not afraid of you making noise. They're afraid of you making sense. Your voice threatens them not because it's aggressive or dramatic, but because it's honest. The kind that doesn't need to be exaggerated, the kind that forces people to stop and feel, and that frightens them. Lies are loud by nature. They require maintenance, repetition, reinforcement. They thrive in echo chambers and group chats, but truth, it doesn't need help, it just needs space, and your voice quiet, calm, or careful carries a weight they can't compete with. That's why they try to discredit you before you speak. That's why they interrupt and mock shift the narrative, because they know once your truth lands, it sticks. You're not dangerous because you shout. You're dangerous because you don't have to. You can drop a single sentence, a simple question, a quiet statement, and their entire performance unravels. That's power. That's what they fear, because when someone speaks the truth and it's clear, heavy, and undeniable, it lives in people's heads long after the conversation ends. It plants seeds, it shifts perspectives, it challenges the comfort of their lie, and they know this. That's why they call you emotional, bitter, obsessed. It's a distraction. If they can convince people you're unstable, they don't have to deal with what you're actually saying. But beneath all their noise, all their spinning is quiet panic, because they know if people really start listening to you, the applause they're used to getting won't last. Truth doesn't go away. It lingers. It echoes in silence, in doubt. Late-night thoughts, people try to suppress, and that's why they fear your voice. Not because it's loud, but because once it's heard, no one hears it. You were the mirror, and they shattered you to escape seeing themselves. You didn't damage anything, you just reflected it. You were the mirror, showing them who they really were behind the act. And that's what they couldn't take. You didn't accuse them. You did not assault them. You just existed with the truth in your eyes, and that was enough. Because deep down, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they avoided, manipulated, and projected, but admitting it out loud would mean shattering the carefully curated version of themselves they've sold to everyone, including themselves. So instead of facing the reflection, they smashed the mirror. They called you difficult, dramatic, damaged. They dismissed your perspective, twisted your words, and reduced your pain to a personality flaw, all because they couldn't stand the idea that they might be the villain in someone's story, so they made sure you couldn't tell yours without being doubted. But that wasn't about you. That was self-preservation in its most cowardly form. You didn't ruin their peace, you threatened their illusion. And for people whose entire identity is built on being the good one, the calm one, the reasonable one, nothing is more threatening than someone who sees right through them. You didn't play by their script. You didn't nod along to their half-truths. You stood your ground, not out of ego, but out of clarity, and they couldn't stand it. What they feared wasn't confrontation, but exposure. You represented the version of themselves they'd spent their entire lives avoiding. Rather than take accountability, they did what cowards do. They destroyed the evidence, which in this case was you. But here's the thing. Breaking the mirror doesn't erase the reflection. It just leaves shards, and every sharp little piece still holds the truth they tried to destroy. You were never the problem. You were the proof. And no matter how hard they try to rewrite the story, your existence alone will always whisper what they didn't want the world or themselves to see. They wrote the ending without you, but the plot was always yours. They thought they could close the chapter without you, tie things up neatly, give themselves the role of protagonist, and walk away as if they learned something. As if your part in the story was some passing inconvenience, a subplot, a lesson, a detour. But the truth is, they never understood the story. Because if they had, they would have realized they were never the main character you were. They tried to reduce you to an afterthought, someone they used to know, someone they outgrew. They turned your name into an anecdote, watered down the impact, edited out their failure. But real stories don't work like that. You can't erase the turning point and pretend you still understand the plot. You don't get to rewrite endings just because the truth makes you uncomfortable. Your presence in their life changed things. You weren't just a phase. You were a mirror, a test, a shift. You were the moment that could have taken them in a new direction if they had the capacity to grow. But they didn't. So they skipped the hard part and tried to jump straight to the ending. One where they look mature, healed, untouched. But endings aren't real if they're built on denial. That fake piece they wear, it's brittle. It cracks every time someone asks the right question. Because the story knows the people who were really watching. They remember who carried the weight, who did the work, who left and still stood tall. They called you a footnote because it made them feel larger. But you were the core arc, the one who evolved, the one who didn't need to lie to look good. You lived through the unraveling and came out knowing exactly who you are. They closed the book too early, but the plot, the real plot, still revolves around you. When people finally read the unedited version, the one without the spin, they'll realize the joke wasn't just that they wrote you off. It's that they never had the range to tell the story in the first place. You didn't lose them. You survived them. You didn't lose anything when they left. What actually happened is that you outgrew the illusion. You stopped bending to be digestible. You stopped shrinking yourself just to keep the peace. And when life turned the lights on and revealed the room for what it was, they couldn't stand the glare. So they ran. That's not loss, that's clarity. They were never your people. They were your mirror, your test, your teacher. Not through wisdom, but through failure. They showed you exactly what it looks like when someone is all appearance and no backbone. They loved being seen as good more than they cared about being good. So when it came down to truth versus image, they folded quickly because integrity is expensive and they weren't willing to pay the cost. You survived them, not just their actions, but the version of you that believed you had to tolerate it. That's the real victory. You survived the gaslight, getting the blame and shifting the weird power games disguised as concern. You survived being misunderstood on purpose. You survived carrying the emotional weight they refused to hold themselves. And now you're not walking away empty. You're walking away informed. It wasn't a breakup, a friendship ending, or a falling out. It was a reveal. They showed you who they were when it mattered and who they weren't. And now you know, you didn't lose someone loyal. You lost someone who was performing loyalty to keep a version of themselves alive that couldn't withstand the pressure of reality. So let them tell whatever story they need to spin it how they want. You have the truth, and you have your peace. Most importantly, you have yourself the version that no longer begs to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding. That's not a loss. That's survival. That's power number. The truth isn't just coming out. It's devouring them. The truth doesn't need your voice to be dangerous. It's doing the work all on its own. It lives in the cracks of their carefully controlled narrative, in the slight twitch in their smile, in the over-explaining stories they keep telling, as if they're trying to convince themselves. They thought staying quiet would save them, but guilt doesn't dissolve in silence. It decays slowly, quietly, relentlessly every time they retell the version of events where they come out looking clean. The truth sits behind their teeth, like rottets in their chest when they're alone in the dead air after applause and the questions they secretly hope no one asks. You don't have to say a word, because the truth is devouring them. Not all at once, but in pieces, in pauses, in the kind of internal erosion that can't be hidden behind good lighting and polished captions. See, guilt doesn't scream, it whispers and stays. It clings to the things they thought they buried, the things they left unsaid, the messes they walked away from without ever owning. And the longer they pretend, the louder it gets, not to the world, but to them. It's there when they try to fall asleep, when they see someone who reminds them of you, when someone starts to ask about the past, and they have to scramble to hold the lie together. What they never realized is that the truth doesn't need revenge, spectacle, or time. And time is turning on them now because while they've been playing the role, guilt has been rehearsing its return quiet, steady, impossible to silence. You didn't need to destroy them. You just needed to survive the rest, the unraveling that's already happening, because no matter how well they dress it up, no matter how many people they fool, the truth is in the room. And it's not going away. It's eating them. They believe they could rewrite the tale by talking fast enough, smiling wide enough, and burying deep enough to erase or twist what occurred into something more favorable. But lies founded on denial inevitably come apart. And the truth? It doesn't require your aid. It just waits silently, calmly, and devastatingly for the show to conclude. You didn't lose, you endured, and that's the part they can't explain away. You didn't collapse under the pressure of their absence, projection, or fake peace. You didn't retaliate, you reclaimed, you learned, and you healed. Not in the polished, performative way they post about, but in the real, gritty, honest way that comes from sitting in pain and walking yourself out of it alone. Every time they tried to erase you, they exposed themselves. Every time they tried to flip the script, they tightened their own noose. They weaponized your silence, distorted your story, and tried to bury the evidence. But all of that only made your truth more powerful, more piercing, because you never needed to shout to be heard. The weight of what happened now does all the talking for you. And the best part, you didn't need to seek revenge. Life took care of that with something far worse, self-conscious intention, and they can't escape it forever. You were the mirror, the test, the story, and the shift. They mistook your depth for weakness, your presence for threat, and your truth for drama. But what you truly were, and still are, is proof. Proof that surviving betrayal does not make you bitter. It makes it clear that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's preparation, that being misunderstood doesn't diminish the truth, it preserves it for when the world is ready to hear. So let them keep performing, let them keep spinning their rehearsed piece, while dodging their own reflection. You're not responsible for cleaning up their mess or correcting their lies. Your only job now is to keep living fully, loudly, and unapologetically, because the truth already chose you, and it's not done speaking. Let the record show you didn't disappear, you outlasted, and the story was always yours. If this spoke to something deep in you, if you felt seen, understood, or even cracked open, don't just scroll on subscribe to the channel. Not just for content, but for truth. The kind most people are too afraid to say out loud. Like the video if you're done pretending. If you're done letting others write your story for you, drop a comment. Your voice matters. This is your space to be unfiltered, unedited, real. Share this with someone who needs to remember they didn't break. They survived, someone who forgot that the silence wasn't weakness, it was power waiting for the right moment to speak. This isn't just another channel. This is where the buried truth rises, where stories get their ending back, where survivors stop whispering. So don't just watch, be a part of it. Remember, they might have tried to erase you, but you're still here, and your voice is only getting begun. God bless you.